June 4th, 1944, 21:30 hours, Southwick House, England. Rain lashes the windows. The maps are already laid out, beaches marked, tides calculated, drop zones fixed to the minute. Outside, thousands of ships wait in the dark, engines idling. They have been waiting for days. Inside the room, the invasion of Europe is paused by a single variable: weather. Forecasts disagree. One predicts a narrow break. Another warns of worsening seas. If the order is given tonight, there will be no recall. If it is delayed, the window may close for weeks, and secrecy may not survive. The men around the table understand what delay risks. So does the man who must decide. Postponement sounds cautious, responsible, safe. But in this moment, waiting carries its own danger. Within hours, a decision will be made that balances uncertainty against momentum, one that does not guarantee success, only the chance to fail under different conditions. History will remember the landings. It will not remember how close they came to not happening at all. By early June 1944, the Allied invasion force assembled in Britain is the largest expeditionary army in history. Months of deception have concealed its true destination. Troops have been briefed and rebriefed. Equipment has been waterproofed. Timetables are synchronized down to the tide and the phase of the moon. At the center of this machinery sits Dwight D. Eisenhower, responsible not only for military success, but for the political cohesion of the alliance behind it. The plan is fixed on June 5th. Everything depends on weather conditions that cannot be controlled, only interpreted. Calm seas are required for landing craft, clear skies for airborne drops, a precise tidal window to expose obstacles on the beaches. On June 3rd and 4th, the Atlantic refuses to cooperate. Storms roll in, winds rise, seas grow rougher than planners anticipated. Aircraft struggle to fly. Landing craft are at risk of swamping before reaching shore. Eisenhower receives briefings from meteorologists who do not agree with one another. Some argue conditions will improve briefly. Others believe the storm will persist. A delay seems prudent. But delay is not neutral. Every extra day strains secrecy. German forces continue to fortify the coast. Units remain on alert longer than planned. The deception campaign, designed to keep German attention fixed elsewhere, has limits. Within the Allied command, opinions diverge. Some commanders urge caution. A failed landing, they warn, could shatter morale and force a retreat that might not be recoverable. Others argue that postponement risks losing the very advantages the plan was built upon: surprise, coordination, and momentum. Eisenhower listens. He understands that waiting feels safer because it postpones responsibility. Acting does not. The decision has not yet been made, but the margin for indecision is shrinking. June 4th, 1944, late evening. The weather room at Southwick House. Charts are spread across the table. Pressure systems, wind speeds, cloud cover, lines drawn in pencil mark predictions that will be outdated within hours. This is not certainty, it is interpretation. The Allied meteorologists are divided. One forecast suggests the storm will persist for several days. Seas will remain too rough for landing craft. Cloud cover will ground aircraft. Airborne drops would scatter units across the countryside. Another forecast identifies a brief interruption, a narrow window beginning late on June 5th and extending into the early hours of June 6th. Winds would ease, clouds would lift just enough. Conditions would still be poor, but usable. It is not a good forecast. It is the only one. Eisenhower listens as James Stagg explains the risk plainly. The break will be short. If it is missed, the next favorable tides will not arrive for weeks. The invasion force cannot remain assembled indefinitely. Secrecy will degrade. Fatigue will spread. Accidents will multiply. Delay, in other words, is not simply postponement. It is exposure. Around the table, senior commanders weigh in. Some argue that launching under marginal conditions invites disaster. Others counter that waiting for perfect weather is an illusion, one that the Atlantic will never grant. The Germans, they note, are operating under the same storm. Poor weather may reduce Allied effectiveness, but it will also reduce German readiness. Still, the risk is asymmetrical. If the Allies fail, they fail publicly and catastrophically. If they wait, they fail quietly by losing momentum. Eisenhower retreats briefly to consider the decision alone. He understands that once the order is given, responsibility cannot be shared. Success will belong to the operation. Failure will belong to him. In the early hours of June 5th, he returns to the room. The forecasts have not improved. They have only narrowed. The window is now measured in hours. At this point, there are no good options left, only different ways to accept risk. And the longer the decision is delayed, the fewer of those options remain. June 5th, 1944, 4:15 a.m., Southwick House. The room is quieter now. The arguments have been made. The forecasts have been revised as far as they can be revised. Nothing new will arrive in time to change the decision. The weather has not improved. It has merely stopped getting worse. Cloud cover is still heavy. Seas will remain rough. Airborne drops will be scattered. Naval landings will be difficult and, in some places, violent. But the window exists. If it is not taken, the invasion will slip beyond control into weeks of delay, into compromised secrecy, into a buildup that can no longer be hidden from an enemy that is watching the channel every day. Eisenhower asks one final question. Is the forecast holding? James Stagg answers carefully. The break is real, he says. Narrow, temporary, but real. There is no confidence in his voice, only professional judgment. Eisenhower pauses. Not long, just long enough for everyone in the room to understand that the decision has already been made. Okay, he says, let's go. With those words, the postponement ends. The invasion is no longer conditional. Orders begin to move outward from headquarters to airfields to harbors to ships already at sea. There will be no further revisions, no second thoughts. Across southern England, engines are started. Paratroopers board aircraft. Landing craft turn toward open water. Men who have been waiting for months are now committed to a timetable measured in minutes. What remains unspoken is how close the operation has come to being canceled not by enemy action, but by uncertainty. The decision to delay did not remove risk. It concentrated it. Because once the order is given, weather is no longer a variable to be debated. It becomes a force to be endured. June 6th, 1944. Before dawn. The English Channel. The sea is still rough. Landing craft pitch and roll as they push toward the French coast. Men are seasick before they ever see land. Equipment is soaked. Formations drift out of alignment in the dark. The weather window holds, but barely. The air conditions are worse than planned. Low clouds and shifting winds scatter airborne formations across Normandy. Some units land miles from their intended drop zones. Others come down in flooded fields, weighed down by equipment they cannot shed in time. These outcomes are not unexpected, they were calculated. What matters is whether the operation can absorb them. On the beaches, the effect of weather varies sharply. In some sectors, rough seas delay landings and disorganize assaults. In others, German defenses manned by units conditioned to expect calm weather for an invasion are caught unprepared. The storm has thinned the German response unevenly. That asymmetry becomes decisive. Where resistance is light, Allied forces establish footholds quickly. Where it is heavy, progress slows under fire and casualties mount. Commanders on the ground make adjustments without waiting for permission, improvising under conditions no briefing fully captured. The postponement has done exactly what it was meant to do. It has not created ideal conditions. It has created possible ones. By mid-morning, it is clear that the landings have not failed, but success is fragile. The operation survives minute by minute, dependent on initiative at lower levels and the enemy's inability to respond coherently. Eisenhower receives reports filtered through chaos, partial successes, alarming losses, long gaps of silence. At this stage, the decision to delay is no longer measurable by forecasts or charts. Its value is measured only by whether the invasion holds, and that outcome is still uncertain. By the evening of June 6th, the question facing Allied headquarters is no longer whether the invasion should have gone forward. It is whether it will survive the night. The beaches are held, but barely. In several sectors, the margins are thin, measured in exhausted infantry, scattered airborne units, and supply lines still vulnerable to disruption. German counterattacks are expected. The next 24 hours will decide whether Normandy becomes a bridgehead or a graveyard. In this context, the decision to delay reveals its true meaning. It did not ensure success. It ensured that failure was not immediate. The postponement placed the invasion inside a narrow window, where German readiness was uneven, command responses were slower, and assumptions about Allied behavior no longer aligned with reality. Had the landings gone forward a day earlier in heavier seas and lower visibility, those margins would have vanished. Had they been delayed longer, the window might not have returned at all. In the weeks that follow, the invasion expands inland. Casualties are severe, progress is slower than planners hoped, but the front holds. Reinforcements arrive, ports are secured. The foothold becomes permanent. Only then does the scale of the risk become clear. The decision to delay was not about caution versus courage. It was about choosing which uncertainty to face. Acting too early would have handed control to the weather. Waiting too long would have handed it to the enemy. By delaying once and only once, the Allied command accepted imperfect conditions in exchange for strategic surprise that still functioned. The beaches of Normandy would become symbols of inevitability. But on the night of June 5th, nothing was inevitable. Victory rested on a decision made without certainty, under pressure, with no margin for correction. That is why the delay mattered. Not because it guaranteed success, but because it preserved the only moment in which success was still possible.